You know, there's a lot of things I think we've all been thinking about. But one of the things I used to often say before the election to people about the rhetoric of Kamala Harris's campaign, you know, is it was always, we won't go back, we won't go back, we won't go back. And, you know, fine, we certainly don't want to go back from the things that we've won, oppressed people, working class people. But so much of what that discourse left out, I think, speaks to a large degree to why they lost. Because you keep talking about what we might lose, but never about how we got it in the first place. And in fact, you'd think that everything that had ever come from civil rights to women's rights to labor rights was just handed down on high from some politician. That people were just sitting around somewhere in squalor and oppression and exploitation, had no idea what to do, no organization, nothing at all. And then all of a sudden, some benevolent politician came and ran a campaign funded by rich people and gave poor people things that they really wanted. And then they were thankful and grateful for it for the rest of their lives. That's how change happens. That it was Lyndon Johnson, not Martin Luther King. That it was FDR, not the sit-down strikes. That it was Abraham Lincoln, not the slaves who rebelled. So the number one question we have to ask ourselves, people say, what is to be done, is what will we do collectively? You know, many people talk a lot about Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. Good speech. Same speech, one of the things he said, and I thought it was interesting, find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. So Trump has many plans, and we can talk about his plans. We will talk about his plans. But he can really, truly only implement all of his plans if we decide to let him. You know, I mentioned Frederick Douglass in that speech, not by accident. You know, it was a speech that was given in 1857. So not that long before the Civil War, at the height of the struggle against slavery. And you know, at that time, there was something called the Fugitive Slave Act. Bipartisan law, by the way, was passed. And it said that any slave that ran away could be taken back to their master anywhere in the country. And that a slave master could hire a bounty hunter to go anywhere at any time and bring them back. And not only were they bringing fugitive slaves back, they were oftentimes targeting abolitionists to sell them into slavery. There was no legal recourse. This was the law, the federal law. If you were a slave and you escaped, they could come get you and take you back. You had no legal case to make. But millions of people all across the northern and western parts of the United States at that time decided that they couldn't live like that. They couldn't live with that. Whether or not the law said one thing, there was a higher law, that they had to fight against slavery no matter what the risk. So they formed things called vigilance committees all across the country that said that when a fugitive slave is brought before the bar into the courthouse, we will go to the courthouse and we will physically resist the imposition of returning them back. That we will physically remove them from the courthouse if we have to and put them on the Underground Railroad and send them to Canada. And maybe we won't succeed. Maybe we'll be beaten. In many cases, these were serious tussles. People were pulling out guns. Maybe we'll even be killed. But we would rather risk our lives than allow our formerly enslaved brothers and sisters to just be taken back like we never said anything or like we don't care. And this became a sensation all across the country. And in many cities, like Springfield, Massachusetts, where the Vigilance Committee was formed by a guy named John Brown, once they formed it, not one slave was ever taken out of there ever again. So before I make some more remarks, I have to say I'm so honored to have the opportunity to speak after our brother Jorge and the work that Indalan is doing, because we have seen Trump reaffirm his situation yesterday on NBC News. He said, we're going to do mass deportations. Well, you think for every one of the 12 to 15 million undocumented people, if that's the number, many of us have friends, family members, co-workers who are undocumented. So that's tens of millions of more people. So you can say it's scary, and it is scary. You can say it's odious, it is odious. But when they start bringing the trucks around to round people up, you can also say, I'm going to step outside of my door, and I'm going to link arm with my neighbors, and if you're going to throw them out, you better throw me out with them, because we're standing together no matter what. So my basic message is, don't give up what you got for nothing. Just because the Democrats didn't do anything, just because Kamala didn't win, doesn't mean that we can't do anything and that we can't win. I'll just say a few more things and I'll get out your way. You know, we also have to note, and thank you, Claudia, for laying this out, I think, well. You know, the whole idea that this is, you know, democracy versus authoritarianism, Democrats or Republicans, that's not what it is. What it is capitalism versus the survival of humanity. The Trump agenda is an ultra-capitalist smash and grab raid on everyday people's lives. I mean, you look at this election. 150 billionaire families spent about $2 billion on the election. The top 10 of those 150, 8 of them were Trump supporters. Some of them were giving over $100 million. Now, do you think they were giving that money out of the goodness of their heart? No, they obviously were not. They're expecting something, and that something is a lot of money, because they know that Trump has already promised to give them hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in tax cuts. That's both corporate and personal. So you're getting more profit from the business, and you're taking more of that money home at the expense of average everyday people and those programs. You know, he's saying, well, you know, we're going to have no taxes on overtime. Certainly sounds good, but what he is not telling you is that the plan of all his friends is actually to make you get paid less money in overtime. That's actually Trump's plan, is to reduce the amount of money you can get paid in overtime. So he's saying no tax on the overtime because he knows it won't matter because you're making less money anyway. Every regulation you could think of, he's like, we will get rid of that regulation. Of course, the climate crisis is the number we know, drill, baby, drill. But every union thing, I mean, listen, the Supreme Court is already doing Project 2025. They might get rid of a lot of the union protections anyway. But what they don't get rid of, Trump is going to come for that too. Environmental protections, labor protections. I mean, anything you could think of, from making sure someone doesn't die from heat stroke on the job to slipping and falling, like they're going to try to get rid of all of that. So for business people, this is fantastic. This is the best case scenario. And of course it's the best case scenario. This is why they need Trump. Because at the end of the day, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said over 40 years ago, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. At an increasing degree, even if people don't have the right name or nomenclature or ideological box to put it in, people can see something is very wrong. That in the richest country in the history of countries, how is it that people are sleeping outside, don't have a roof over their head, going to bed hungry? You know, the mainstream media, which claims to tell you things, amazingly to me, never looks at data being collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, not Euguene Puryear, the U.S. Census Bureau, saying that 155 million people in this country are having at least a little trouble making their ends meet week to week, not month to month, week to week, not paycheck to paycheck, week to week. That 21 million people are going hungry at least sometime, week to week. They say socialism is bad because you got a ration card. In capitalism, paycheck is your ration card. And a lot of people are on starvation rations. So when you look at the situation that we are in, people are rising up. Ferguson, Baltimore, Minneapolis, the UAW, the Teamsters. I mean, everywhere you look, the labor movement, the streets, the climate movement, Standing Rock, Line 3. Like I could probably stand here and list 100 things that have been happening where people who are exploited and oppressed have been standing up in powerful ways that have shocked and electrified the world. So in that context, the very rich understand that they can actually not really convince that many people that somehow the agenda of the billionaires is really the agenda of us, of average people. So there's only one thing they can try to do, and that is to impose it on us with the most authoritarian police state, whatever you want to call it, that they can put together and get into the office. And that's Trump. So this is the agenda of the ultra-rich to impose upon you the destruction of your life, your livelihood, and the planet that we all live on, all for their own short-term gain. And they don't care. You know, it's like, what's the Matt Damon movie, Elysium, where all the rich people go into space? Well, Elon Musk is saying, let's go to space. And he's the number one richest person in America and a big Trump donor. So they already planning. It's not just Hollywood. They're saying we're going to destroy the earth. We're going to destroy your life. We're going to use AI to put you out of work. And then when you get so mad that we can't stop you from rising up and killing us all, we're just going to go to space and control you with robots down here. I mean, it sounds wild, but this is like what they're actually planning. This is why it's 36 cop cities. This is why there's critical infrastructure laws in every state saying you can't protest pipelines. This is why you have RICO charges on activists, because they know they're not going to do anything to solve people's basic problems, that more and more people are waking up to what's going on, that people are getting increasingly organized and increasingly militant and bold and willing to fight back. So they have to find some way to try to beat you to death over the head to stop you, because they know at this point you see that the game is up. So the question in front of us is, what are we going to do? Are we going to be as bold as the abolitionists? I hope so. Are we going to recognize that so much of what's put it up, you know, just with the whole thing leading up to the election, all these people, don't vote for a third party, don't do this, don't do that, support Democrats, you're wasting money, you're wasting this. I don't even want to get into it. You remember it. They said the same thing then. In the 1840s and the 1850s, when people started stepping out against slavery, people said, you're crazy. Why would you do this? If you don't support the two major parties, you're setting us back. You know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they were the most hated, hunted, rebuked, scorned, prices on their heads, killed, murdered, jailed people out there. Now everyone will turn around and say, oh, we love them, and it's great, and we'll name a street, and we'll put up a statue, and I'll dedicate a building at a college. But they don't want to talk about the fact that at a certain point, they were considered the outcasts of society. So we do have to move from the margins to the center. We're not that weak, but I know we're not as powerful as we'd like to be. But there's no way to get from point A to point B until we actually set up a political North Star of who we are, what we want to be, and where we want this country and this world to go. I'm wrapping up now. Once you have an agenda and a plan, you can win, but you can't win without organization. So I personally am wary, because we have to be serious, real, and clear-eyed. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful at this room. I'm hopeful at the thousands of people online. I'm hopeful at the millions of people who have already been in struggle over the past 12 months. I'm hopeful that if we can get organized in a way that we haven't been organized yet before, we will be able to destroy the entrenched power structures that are taking us down, destroying our people, and destroying our planet. So that's what is to be done. That's what's next. And I look forward to being in the fight with you here today. Thank you so much.